Quick question for you. When did learning about change become your excuse for not changing? This is for all the intellects out there, including myself, who try to think their way through life, think their way through their feelings, think their way through their situations, strategize, create plans, study, know all the information, create all the options, assess all the possibilities, do all the trauma work, do all the shadow work, do all the things so you understand all the things about the things better than anybody else knows about the things. You have more language and tools and frameworks and mental models and structures. You can describe your trauma and your fears and your character and your spirituality with diagrams and Play-Doh and whatever props and accessories you need in so many colorful ways. And yet, when faced with the opportunity, under pressure, in the moment, you fall apart, you lose your shit, you get triggered, and nothing changes. I have spent my life trying to understand me, trying to understand people, studying behavioral psychology and advertising and design and counseling and psychology and spirituality and coaching. And I've come up with my own frameworks and models, and I've studied other people's, and I don't regret a second of it. It's wonderful. It's useful. It makes for great conversation at parties, and we can all get into big debates. And yet, at those same parties, with everybody there with their heads full of knowledge and their brains full of abilities and words and frameworks, everyone judges each other and everyone loses their shit, and nobody can really hold space for things that differ from what they believe and feel is true. It's kind of funny. It's kind of ironic, right? To sit there and think that there are these highly skilled people who effectively can't really practice what they know. I've been like that. Maybe you're like that. Maybe you can be like that. We're not always like that. I think the areas in our life where we have much more experiential application of things, there is a calmer sense of knowing. And the areas where we're still learning, there's obviously much more intellect. And one of these areas is change. I think when it comes to change is this really weird thing in people's minds where it's really, really scary. And it's full of uncertainty. It's full of discomfort, potential pain. And yet, on the other hand, people want change. When things stay the same, people get frustrated, they're bored, they're stagnant, they're stuck. And so then they want change. But then, of course, they want change that they like. They don't want change they don't like. They want to control the change. And then that's another paradox because, well, when can change be controlled and when it cannot be controlled? And therefore, do we like it? Do we want it? And that sort of thing. And I think one of the relationships we have with change is this inevitability that comes with it, which is it's going to happen regardless. You're going to get older. Your body's going to change. The environment, the world is going to change. And the question is are you able to meet that change with love, with confidence, with a sense of self? Or are you going to be bashed around and battered by the waves of that change and struggling to get your head above water? One of those paradoxes of when people start to experience change and then they try to make everything go back to how it was, there's this wholesale rejection of the change. It's something very uncomfortable. They're not ready for it. And this sort of always introduces this concept of, when are we ready for change? There's the idea that maybe when someone in our life is dying, someone dies tragically versus dies of, let's say, a long-term illness, even though it's sad either way, the person with the long-term illness, we might feel that we had so many chances to say goodbye, create lasting memories, whereas the person who was taken tragically in the accident, that comes as a massive shock to us because that was a change we weren't prepared for. I think in our desire to understand change and to choose change and to be with change and to accept change, we try to study and understand change, all the possible angles. But if we're not careful, we can try to have such an intellectual hold on change, like we try to read all the papers on economics or globalization or war or, contagious diseases. And at some point that does not replace and it does not substitute the actual lived experience of going through that thing. And so at some particular point, we are going to be met with change, and all our intellectual understanding and frameworks under the sun still may not be adequate to actually cope with what actually happens when the change occurs to us. I think there is this paralysis that in our attempt to soften change and to make it easier for ourselves, we try to understand it, we try to plan for it and prepare for it and safeguard against it and have some sort of assurances and guarantees and protection mechanisms from it. And that's paradoxical because a huge part of learning to be with change is facing it whenever it comes, however it comes, and knowing that whatever happens will be okay. if we put our okayness and our sense of self in those external situations, as in it's in these frameworks, or it's in that, tool set, or it's in that whatever it might be that needs to be in place first before we can survive the situation, then that's what I actually think amplifies the scariness of the change. At some particular point, I do a bit of scuba diving, we do horse riding and sailing and all these different kinds of things. And these are environments where change can be introduced suddenly. You're happily doing your thing, and the next thing, something happens, equipment failure, you're working with animals, something like that. All your preparation may go out the window. Now, obviously, you hope that there are certain things that you've practiced, become muscle memory, and you respond accordingly. And there are always things you just cannot prepare for. And so at some particular point, our best way to actually embrace change is to expose ourselves to it a lot. Like anything, if you want to be better at piano, if you want to be better at the gym, if you want to be better at relationships, you've got to expose yourself to it. You can't try to perfect it from your bedroom through online courses and then show up in the world one day having become the domain expert on this thing, having read all the books, and expect to just sort of walk in and masterfully do it and nothing ever goes wrong. This is why scrappy people may often go further in life in certain areas, because at some point they're willing to live the change rather than just intellectualize it. Long answer to a chewy question, but that's my quick question for you today. When did learning about change become your excuse for not living it? Something for you to think about. I'll see you next time.